Revelation.
Hey everyone, welcome to today's podcast. It is December 23rd, 2025. I'm going to get into the headlines in just a second. So today we've learned that the Clinton administration protected Jeffrey Epstein and the relationship between the then president Bill Clinton and Jeffrey Epstein. In the 1990s, Bill Clinton was informed about child pornography allegations through the FBI against Jeffrey Epstein. And I guess they killed the investigation, presumably at the direction of the president. And also, Bari Weiss, the new executive editor at CBS, killed a piece smearing Donald Trump on 60 Minutes this Sunday. And miraculously on Monday, Judge Boasberg issued an order telling the president to return Venezuelan illegal immigrants, return them from the gang prison in El Salvador, return them to the United States. We got these stories and more coming up right now. So let's read the news. We're going to start out with the word of the day. I'm going to try to bring this back. The word of the day is preordained. Now, I talked briefly about Judge Boasberg, who was relying on CBS to provide cover for his ruling yesterday, ordering the president to return to the United States the Venezuelan gang members who entered the country illegally. So let's get into the news. We got breaking news here. U.S. economy expands at surprisingly strong 4.3 annual growth rate in the third quarter. This is only surprising to the Associated Press and others. In the lamestream media, liberal propagandists, the same thing. They're painting a delusional picture, or they're propagandizing half the country, all the liberals and leftists out there, that somehow Trump is such a buffoon, he doesn't know anything about business, even though in his first term that he showed he understands how the economy works and he could turn the economy around on a dime. He did that when he took office originally in 2016, and then he did it again after COVID. After the onset of COVID, really, they extended the pandemic there for years after it was generally over. I mean, we still have mail-in ballots, and that was put into being because of the pandemic, which after a while was gone. I mean, any kind of flu pandemic doesn't last more than a year and a half, 2 years at the utmost. All right, of course, I'm having technical difficulties. I didn't do a good enough test here before I got started, which is unfortunate. So I'm not getting any audio monitor here. So hope I'm coming through okay. Welcome to the podcast. There won't be any episode tomorrow or Christmas, possibly on Friday. Please engage the channel, like, subscribe, leave a comment, share the podcast, and don't forget to join me every day for the live stream, Monday through Friday, 10 a.m. on Rumble, YouTube, and other platforms as well. Thanks for joining me today. So let's move on to the rest of the headlines here. Let's go back to this Associated Press story, and we're going to flesh this out, because it doesn't matter what inflation is, it matters where growth is in comparison to inflation. So let's go to the story. The U.S. economy grew at a strong 4.3 annual rate in the third quarter. It's not surprising to some people. It's not surprising to us. The most rapid expansion in 2 years. I think it's more than 2 years. I don't think Biden had any rapid expansion in his term, but I digress. As government and consumer spending as well as exports all increased, the trade deficit shrank. That helps increase the GDP. U.S. gross domestic product from July through September, the economy's total output of goods and services rose from its 3.8 growth rate in April-June quarter, the Commerce Department said on Tuesday in a report delayed by the government shutdown, obviously. Analysts surveyed the data. Firm FactSet forecast growth of 3% in the period, so it's over 1% higher than the forecast. And I don't believe FactSet anyway. They're always very conservative, and they're always downgrade any forecast for. They did this the whole Trump's first term, did it every quarter. They forecasted it down, and it surpassed that forecast. Goes on to say, however, inflation remains higher than the Federal Reserve would like. Who cares about what the Federal Reserve would like? The Fed's favorite inflation gauge, called the Personal Consumption Expenditure Index, or PCE, was 2.8 annual pace last quarter, up from 2.1 in the second quarter, which is almost where the Fed wanted it to be, at 2%. And people squawk that how come you said it had to be 2% for you to lower interest rates and it was 2.1, cut us some fucking slack. All right, so we need to get now to a big story here, and it's going to offer a context onto global, dynamic global diplomacy and relations, particular with our adversary, the Communist Chinese. And when I say our adversary, I don't mean necessarily the United States as much as I refer to constitutionalists, patriots, people that know what the United States represents, and that's why we favor it. We choose to live here, and that's why everyone wants to come here, is the enshrined liberties, civil, individual liberties, and other freedoms that other countries just don't have. The biggest one, of course, is the freedom to create your own wealth. Okay. Here's the story. New York Times. Mistrial in case of New York official charged with working for China. Linda Sun was accused by federal prosecutors of selling her allegiance and being rewarded handsomely for influence peddling. Now, you're not supposed to do this in trial law, but we need to put this in context. What is the context? The context is that the United States, our United States, is replete with Chinese espionage and other organizations, individuals supporting the will of the Chinese Communist Party. People don't understand this, that it's not a few isolated incidents, it's everywhere. So if you have people sitting on the jury that are going to hang the jury, why would they do that? Because they're trying to, I don't know, defend a communist? If you have communists or liberals or socialists on a jury, and that's what this trial is all about. They're going to help the communist, which is Linda Sun and her husband, really. Let's get into the story. Federal judge in Brooklyn on Monday declared a mistrial in the case of Linda Sun, a former aide to Democratic governors who was accused of working as an agent for China after jurors said they could not reach a verdict unanimously, I guess, or they're going to vote. So, in other words, the jury was split. So there were recalcitrant, entrenched jurors who would not vote to prosecute a woman and her husband who worked to benefit the communist Chinese government. Ms. Sun, 42, was accused by federal prosecutors of being an unscrupulous public servant who sold her allegiance to China. She and her husband, Chris Hu, who was also on trial, carried out Beijing's bidding, prosecutors claim, including by blocking Taiwanese officials from meeting with the governor of New York and removing references to the Uyghurs, a primary Muslim ethnic minority that has faced persecution from the Communist Chinese Party. And the New York Times says, from official speeches. So Kathy Hochul wasn't allowed to talk about the Uyghurs. That's basically what we're saying here. This woman was a Chinese agent, just like the driver for Dianne Feinstein for 30 years was a Chinese agent. They're everywhere. Just like Fang, who was a friend of Eric Swalwell, he had an affair with her. She was a Chinese agent, a honeypot operation, and he was forced off the Intelligence Committee for having what the FBI called an affair with a Chinese agent. There are Chinese communist police stations all over the United States policing expats and asylum seekers, escapees from communist China who are living in the United States. So Just the News covers the story. Trial for ex-governor's aide accused of selling influence to China ends with hung jury. Her and her husband, Linda, and her husband, Chris, also face charges of profiting from medical equipment scheme during the pandemic. Yeah. What? Was that was Cuomo, right? Was it intubators? The jury's four-person said the panel was deadlocked on all 19 counts was unable to reach a unanimous verdict. Yeah, so they needed a unanimous verdict. So there were some holdouts there who didn't want to vote to convict obvious people who were spying for the Chinese Communist Party. Why? Probably because the Chinese Communist Party had reached these jurors, either bribe them or otherwise force them into not voting to convict these people. How could you be an American patriot and not convict people who were obviously doing the bidding of the Chinese Communist Party? I just don't understand that. And I don't want a new Cold War, but we're in one. I have nothing against the Chinese people. I just don't like communists. I don't like communism. I know Karl Marx and Friedrich Engels were actually rich kids who devised this plan for the controlled opposition. Friedrich Engels, actually, his father was an industrialist that owned several factories, and when his father died, Friedrich Engels kept the factories. Did he give part ownership of the factories to the employees there? No. He eventually sold the factories and kept all the money. He didn't give any money to the people that work there or anything like that. So let's not be confused where Marxism really came from. Federalist has the headline, "How many Chinese visa holders have to be charged before Trump stops importing them into our university?" On Friday, FBI Director Kash Patel announced that Hu Hang Xiang, a J-1 visa holder and a postdoctoral researcher from China, has been charged with smuggling E. coli into the U.S. and making false statements about it. Xiang was conducting postdoctorate research at Indiana University. This is yet another example of a researcher from China given the privilege to work at a U.S. university who then allegedly chose to take part in a scheme to circumvent U.S. laws and receive biological materials hidden in a package originating from China. The Food and Drug Administration says certain types of E. coli can be life-threatening, obviously, leading to kidney failure and development of high blood pressure, in addition to contaminating meat and crops. And that last bit is the most important. You see, there have been several cases of Chinese nationals trying to smuggle in what would be seen as sabotage pathogens. There was a wheat blight that they smuggled in, and now E. coli. And there are many, many others. Like I said, when you're dealing with one case, you can't always introduce disparate cases, but these are all Chinese nationals either smuggling things out of the country, protected material, pathogens, etc., and smuggling things into the country like pathogens, particularly targeting agriculture. Now, many people don't know, but the understanding of what happened with the Spanish flu was that German nationals or people working for the Imperial German state, I was going to say government, but it's really the German Empire, the Kaiser, the king, came to this country with pathogens looking to infect agriculture and livestock. And it turns out the Spanish flu actually, or presumably, was born out of that. The first patient zero of the Spanish flu was actually a U.S. Army cook in the Midwest who was slaughtering livestock. More news from Fox News. FCC announces ban on new Chinese-made drones over national security concerns. Criminal, terrorists, and foreign hostile actors have intensified their weaponization of these technologies, creating new and serious threats to our homeland, according to the FCC. Yeah. Like I said, we're replete. It's not sure that if we went to war with China, that as a society we could even function, given all the sabotage that is in place, all the sleeper cells. We would really have to do like they did in World War II, an internment. The difference with a Chinese internment is, in the case of the Japanese here during World War II or after Pearl Harbor, most of the Japanese living here didn't want anything to do with the Japanese Empire, the Emperor, or Japan, or anything. The difference now is a lot of Chinese nationals and expats are working for the Chinese government, wittingly, unwittingly, and extorted to do so. So let's move on to another big story that broke. I covered it just briefly yesterday when Bari Weiss ordered the spiking of a 60 Minutes episode, which was another propaganda piece, a Trump smear. Basically, you could see it. It's on Canadian television. You can find it on YouTube. It's just more of the same. It's, and they're trying to push back against Bari Weiss. Good for her for standing up. And we're going to get into why that is. But first, we're going to go to The Intercept. Bari Weiss is doing exactly what she was installed to do at CBS to do. By pulling a 60-minute segment, the new editor is torching the network's credibility to protect the Ellison family interests. According to The Intercept, that's really not true, because what Ellison is trying to do, and many people are trying to do, is with the demise of wokeness and the demise of real leftist intellectual credibility, they're trying to, and if you don't know me, I worked in journalism for 30 years. So when I got into journalism, objectivity was the key. Now, it's not fair and balanced, which means you talk to this side and you talk to that side, and you let the consumer of the news, your readers or viewers or what have you, decide. That's not what journalism does. Journalism does, you look at, particularly if it's a contentious argument, you look at one side, you look at the other, you talk to both, and then you draw a conclusion that your viewer can or cannot agree with. But The Intercept doesn't believe that. The Intercept believes that Ellison isn't trying to make a more marketable product, a news product, fair and balanced. It doesn't have to be fair and balanced. It has to be objective. So you can't be objective unless you look at it from either point of view on either side of the argument. And the reason being is that the truth is somewhere in between. A lot of people say the truth is always in the middle. It's not necessarily in the middle. It's somewhere in between two points of view. That's the point. That's why you have to look at both points of view to reach your conclusion. It's like a grand jury. If you just listen to one point of view, well, you're going to come to a reasonable conclusion. That's why they say grand juries could indict a ham sandwich, because you only have to listen to the prosecutor. Okay. The Intercept goes on to say, by all accounts, the piece had been thoroughly reported. The idea that reporters need to secure on-camera interviews with government officials, wait. Before reporting on government misdeeds effectively gives the administration veto power. No, it doesn't. If you don't show that you talk to the other side, then it's a biased argument. It's simple. If you go to the Israeli government and you ask them how they feel about the Gaza incursion, what do you think they're going to say? Of course, you have to talk to the people of Gaza also, or opposing points of view. You look at opposing points of view and you can and cannot reach a conclusion. You should, if you do your reporting correctly. But you're always supposed to say, this is what they say, this is what they say. And from my reporting as a journalist, this is the conclusion I come to. But the reason you have to do that is because so if the viewer or reader looks at it, they can go, well, he didn't come to a correct conclusion. It's the same reason you have to attribute to named sources, because then someone else from another news organization could find your source and they could talk to them and find out whether your story is accurate or not. New York Post has the headline, read the memo Bari Weiss sent to CBS staffers after yanking 60-minute spot on notorious El Salvadoran prison. And I'm going to get to it in just a minute. I'm just going to tell, if you didn't know what the case was, and we're going to get to this, is that a bunch of Tren de Aragua, which is a Venezuelan prison gang. So what Maduro did is he let out these gang members from prison and told them to go to the U.S., which they did. So now they were detained, arrested, deported as illegal aliens. That's the course of action with illegal aliens. They get deported. There's this thing that they keep talking about, due process, and have hearings. And hearings for what? Only to determine whether they are in the country illegally. Not whether, when they were here, they were good or not good or whatever. That is of no consequence. Are they in the country legally? Yes? Okay, then they get a hearing. No? They're deported. Do they have protected status? Maybe if they have protected status, then they get due process. The fact that every illegal immigrant gets to sit in front of a judge and say, but I like it here. That doesn't matter. Doesn't matter if they paid their taxes. It doesn't matter if they have a family. It doesn't matter if their neighbors like them and they have friends. It doesn't matter. If they're here illegally, they're deported. So the fact is that they're deported. The question only comes into the fact that they were deported to a country that that they're not native to. And if that happens to them, there has to be good reasoning, and a judge would have to approve it. So they're using the Alien Enemies Act, blah, blah, blah. So in any case, Bari Weiss went on to say, at present, we do not present the administration's argument for why it sent 252 Venezuelans to CBS prison. That's the gang prison in El Salvador. There's just one soundbite from Carolyn Levitt claiming they are evildoers. The data we present paints an incongruent picture. Not clear. Doesn't follow a line of reason. Secretary Dome's trip to CBS, we report that she took pictures and video there with MS-13 gang members, not TDA members. There's no comment from her or her staff about the goal of the trip was, etc., etc., etc. She closes by saying we need to do a better job of explaining the legal rationale by which the administration detained and deported these 252 Venezuelans to CBS. It is not as simple as Trump evoking the Alien Enemies Act and being able to deport them immediately. I disagree, but this is her talking, so she's even fallen on the side of the leftists, the protectionists. And that isn't the administration's argument. The admin argued in court that detainees are due judicial review, and we should explain this, with a voice arguing that Trump is exceeding his authority under the relevant statute, and another arguing that he's operating within the bounds of his authority. Yeah, she wants to present two sides of the argument. There's a genuine debate here. If we cut down Kristi Noem's analysis, we'd have the time. It's basic. You don't even contact one person from the administration. You don't give them an opportunity to retort. You don't say, this is the piece we're doing. We don't believe you have legal justification to send these people to El Salvador. What say you? They don't do that. That's bad journalism. And it's not like they tried to and were rejected or denied an interview. They just didn't try. And so obviously that's a propaganda piece. You just talk to one side and then you air it as such. Well, the Federalist chimes in and says illegal aliens will say and do anything to stay in America. We don't need a 60-minute sob story to tell us that. An insubordinate content creator at CBS's 60 Minutes is throwing a public fit because a video segment of hers was apparently spiked at the last minute by her boss, Bari Weiss. And Bari Weiss was brought in to make it more objective. That's what she was there to do. So she's doing what her boss asked her to do, much like The Intercept said. But The Intercept alluded in their wonderful journalism, and you kind of wonder why, what's his name? Greenbaum. Why he left. Why he created it and then left. In any case, I digress. Sharon Alfonsi sent a testy letter to her colleagues complaining that Weiss yanked the segment on illegals who were deported to a prison in El Salvador. Our story was screened 5 times and cleared by both CBS attorneys and Standards and Practices, she wrote in a letter, which then conveniently shared with the New York Times reporter. It is factually correct. In my view, pulling it now after very rigorous internal checks is not my editorial decision, is a political one. Not true. When you have attorneys and Standards and Practices, all they do is make sure the lawyers make sure you can't be sued. And there's easy ways to put out propaganda that isn't technically slander. And Standards and Practices mean you have sources for what you claiming. It goes on, though. Weiss released her own statement to say the segment would eventually air on some later date and suggested it currently lacked sufficient context. I agree. And missing critical voices, the administration, citing anonymous sources. Ugh. The Times said Weiss took issue with Alfonsi's calling illegal immigrants migrants. Indeed. The reasoning behind this, too, isn't just Bari Weiss, it's me and a lot of other people, is calling them migrants confuses the issue on whether they have legal right to be here. Migrants are usually legally in the country to do work, usually in agriculture, and then they go back home after the work is finished. But Bari Weiss also said that a high-ranking Trump administration official should be interviewed for the piece. Of course. You're not providing both sides of a contentious issue. It's not like when you report on a car crash or something. It is what it is. But you're talking about legal gray area that needs to be ruled on. And we're going to get to why that's important. Several foreigners who are all but certain to have immigration lawyers actively trying to re-import them to the U.S. and who swear that they were tortured as a result of President Trump's removing them from the country. Not true. All right. Why? This is what you have to understand. Why did the piece have to run on this past Sunday? Why was everybody upset when it was pulled last minute? Because I think even Bari Weiss knew. What did she know? Just the News reports Judge Boasberg orders Trump administration to allow Venezuelans deported to El Salvador to return to the U.S. That's the point of the story, to provide intellectual cover for what Judge Boasberg was preordained to do. So you see, I understand how the propaganda works. The news media was providing the cover to the lefty loonies who still watch CBS 60 Minutes, and then they watch the piece, and then Judge Boasberg issues the order, and they go, oh, well, of course, because what I saw on CBS makes it clear that the Trump administration didn't obey the law. Well, they did. It's whether or not you consider Venezuelan prison gang members who were released from prison and sent to the United States as enemy combatants. In a fourth generational war, the answer is yes. Now, maybe some of you lefty loonies that are watching CBS and love Judge Boasberg will say, fourth generational what? You see, warfare just isn't conducted on the battlefield anymore. So it's the same thing as sending fentanyl into the country is a bit of a payback for the opium wars that happened in China many years ago. So go back to your history books and read about that one. Now, that was mainly the British that farmed opium in Afghanistan and then sent it to China. So they strung out the whole population and then they walked around like they owned the place. In any case, getting back to the story, Federal District Judge James Boasberg ruled Monday that the Trump administration must allow Venezuelan men, suspected TDA members, were deported earlier this year to return to the United States to fight allegations they were part of violent gangs. Were they? Weren't they? I imagine they have evidence that they were. So maybe they want to see that evidence. Fine. Okay. Doesn't matter. If they were deported to Venezuela, there would be no issue. But it's the fact that they were deported as gang members to a country, El Salvador, where being an affiliate of an organized gang, criminal gang, is against the law. So if you're a gang member, you go to prison, whether you committed a crime or not, if you have affiliation with a gang. That's how they cleaned up the streets from MS-13 that was basically ruling the country. And now normal Salvadorans love the place and love Bukele, who's the president that made all this happen. In any case, multiple courts have since ruled that hundreds of deportations were illegal because the government still needs to provide due process. I don't think so. If they're here illegally, they get deported. The problem is, like I said, if you're deporting them, not because they're criminal gang members, but because they're illegal immigrants, that's allowed. But they're supposed to be deported to their country of origin. But if you're sending them to a third country, and specifically a country that's going to imprison them, you have to, I guess, give them some sort of due process. That's the battle, is they want, the liberals want, the progressives want to keep people that are here illegally in the country, whether they're criminal or not or whatever. But that's not the law. So you can argue the law. Trump will win. You can argue the law. You can have stays and injunctions, and that's basically what it is. You have to bring him back here so we can go through the whole process correctly. And it's the same thing with Abrego Garcia, is he should have been deported. But they're saying that he's threatening El Salvador. And they're saying there's not enough criminal misconduct for him to be imprisoned here. He still should be deported. He crossed the Mexican border. He should have sent back to Mexico. There's got to be some legal precedent there. All right. Let's get to, since we're talking about criminality, let's get to some criminality. Just the news, man charged in violent attack on senior in Seattle had already been booked 8 times in 2025. Seattle Mayor Bruce Harrell faced criticism from social media users after a debate with Mayor-elect Katie Wilson in which he said the government should consider a repeat offender's life story, including any instances of child abuse or hunger in their lives, in determining justice. I disagree. The crime is the crime. I don't care why he committed the crime. So in that case, Nick Reiner, he was, ignored by his parents or whatever. He wasn't given enough love. So he acted like a crazy person. Come on. I hate to moralize. It's morality. If you're not clear about moral guidelines and you don't live your life in some sort of moral framework where you think that hitting a woman in the face with a 2x4 with a nail in it, blinding her, she's a 75-year-old woman. If you don't know that's wrong, then you need to be taken off the street. But the point is, I'm sorry, I had more text here. Thought I did. I don't know what happened to it. Yeah, well, it talked about how she got hit in the face. I don't know where that text is. All right, we'll go on to the next story, though. Zero Hedge again. DHS offering $3,000 to illegal aliens to self-deport as part of a holiday deal. Great. Here's $3,000. Now get the fuck out. And it's not just $3,000. It's $3,000 and a plane trip. Department of Homeland Security is offering triple the amount of cash to illegal immigrants who willingly leave the United States through a smartphone app as part of a holiday deal. Well, see, that's a Christmas spirit. And it's not racist. There's a reasoning behind getting rid of illegal immigrants, because you need to subvert the plan that they were brought in in the first place. And here's part of it. The Federalist is reporting non-citizens say she voted in multiple Georgia elections. They gave me a paper to sign. A woman who moved to Georgia from the Bahamas 30 years ago and is not a citizen admitted during a December 9th state election board hearing that she voted multiple times. It is illegal for non-citizens to vote. Obviously, we know that. Clayton County resident Melanie Pickett is a Bahamian native, but has lived in the Peach State for approximately 30 years. I got a driver's license, and then I started getting voting-related information in the mail, and I said, okay. And then I got a jury duty summons, and so I went to the jury duty, and at the end of the information sheet you have to fill out, it said, are you a U.S. citizen? And I said, no, and they told me I could go home. This year, I think, this was my second time trying to vote, and this year they told me I couldn't vote, and that was about it. So how long has she been voting? She didn't say when she got her driver's license or how long she was voting. Doesn't matter, right? Laws don't matter the way, even if you think a law is unfair, it's still the law. If you think a law is unfair, you go to change the law. You don't just scoff the law. And to be honest with you, I do scoff law. Only with speeding. I have skirted the law many times before, but these days I understand the framework in which you can, live in peace, try to create some wealth, and make your own way. Right? But if you have to resort to criminality to make your way, not good, because as I always said, whatever you do, if you start infringing on other people, not fair. Not fair to those folks. As a matter of fact, have to go to the police department today to file a criminal complaint against trespassers. I will get into that at a different time. Let's move on with the news, though. The Telegraph, Epstein files latest. A, in Balmoral, asked Maxwell for inappropriate friends. A wrote from Balmoral, well, we know that's Prince Andrew. How's LA? Have you found me some new inappropriate friends? Let me know when you are coming over, as I am free from the 25th of August until the 2nd of September and want to go somewhere hot and sunny with some fun people before having to put my nose firmly to the grindstone for the fall. Any ideas gratefully received? See ya, A, XXX. I have only been able to find appropriate friends. So that means of legal age, said Maxwell. Hey, man, to each their own, but there might be a point in time where you have to pay the piper. Speaking of paying the piper, PJ Media, Bill Clinton's FBI buried Epstein bombshell allegations. According to a report from the New York Times, Bill Clinton's FBI sat on a bombshell complaint about Jeffrey Epstein for nearly a decade. This revelation has us wondering whether Bill Clinton's cozy relationship with a pedophile financier played a role in that inexcusable action. Yeah. So Bill Clinton, if you didn't know, when Bill Clinton was president, he actually at one point ditched his Secret Service detail to go have some fun with underage girls at Jeffrey Epstein's island. He was often on the Lolita Express, Jeffrey Epstein's plane. And you have to understand, everybody that flew on the plane didn't undertake sex with underage girls. However, there were underage girls on the plane when Bill Clinton was on it. And the point is, when you're flying around on a plane, there's no jurisdiction. Same thing with his island. The criminal penalties are far less for having sex with girls that are under 18, between 16 and 18, versus in the United States, under 18 is still statutory rape. I'm not sure what the laws are in the Bahamas, but if you're on a private island, who's going to know about it? Okay, let's get to the point of the matter. Post-Millennial reports Epstein's staffer reported him to FBI for child pornography in 1996. That's during Bill Clinton's presidency. Complaint was ignored for a decade. Well, in 2006, he wasn't president, so it didn't matter. But that's when the investigation started. The original investigation that was buried and pushed under the carpet in Florida. Maria Farmer said she had waited 30 years and finally feels vindicated after the report was made public. Farmer, a former employee of Epstein who helped him purchase pieces of artwork, had filed a report about the financier on September 3rd, 1996, per the New York Times. Farmer told the outlet that she has waited 30 years and finally feels vindicated. I can't believe it. They can't call me a liar anymore. What was she saying? Well, she said Farmer reported to authorities that she had taken some photos of her younger sisters, ages 16 and 12, for her personal artwork. However, some of those photos were in the nude. She said that Epstein had stolen the nude photos and asked her to take pictures of young girls at swimming pools. prefer artwork. Sick, sick, sick. I have some anecdotal stories that I'm not going to go into, that some questionable people's houses I went to, and they had sexually suggestive, at the very least, photos of nude children. And you're like, what? Now, there are photos of nude children that can be seen as artwork. I don't find the naked body, disgusting or whatever, that aren't sexually suggestive, that you could go, well, okay, I don't find photos of nude children arousing, so I don't really care. But, nudity doesn't really bother me, but when it's sexually suggestive, that really crosses the line. However, I would never hang any of that shit in my house. This is me talking about artwork. That was that whole thing about that photo that Elton John had hanging that was by the photographer. I think her name was Goldstein. And like it showed a little girl with her bottom exposed or something. But it was frontal nudity. Not my cup of tea, but when you start talking about art, what is art necessarily? But it bordered on pornography, child pornography, and so people were like, well, that's sick. But that's Elton John, New York Post. Jeffrey Epstein joked he'd taken the short route home in jailhouse letter to Larry Nassar before suicide. So they're going along. Here's the note, and the point I'm going to put in here is our president also shares our love of young, nubile girls. When a young beauty walked by, he loved to grab snatch, whereas we ended up snatching grub in the mess halls of the system. Now, two things I want to talk about here is, first, as he says, as you know by now, I've taken the short route home. So here's my analysis. Jeffrey Epstein did not commit suicide. Jeffrey Epstein faked his suicide and is living his life somewhere. Because when you say I've taken the short route home, why would you say that? You decided to kill yourself many days ahead of time? Yeah, I just don't believe it. And I think this is a intelligence operation where you confuse the situation by people arguing over whether he was killed or whether he committed suicide, and they're not talking about whether or not he was smuggled out of prison by faking his death. So all the things that could have easily led to his murder could have easily led to his escape. And given the wherewithal he possessed, why do people find that unbelievable? I don't. And so, in the end of his little note, whether he's talking about the president of the United States, he says our president, could be president of the Man Boy Lovers Association or whatever. Who knows? In any case, if it is referring to Trump, it could be a parting shot at Trump. Because it was Trump that ended up having him put in jail. It's corruption. All right, here's more of the Federalist. New docs reveal shocking lengths Obama and Biden went to protect Hillary Clinton. Get Trump. Obama-Biden administration prevented agents investigating Hillary Clinton from reviewing some 8 thumb drives of intel based on purported concerns over executive and congressional privilege. Newly released documents reveal This reality renders last month's revelation that the Biden administration approved special counsel Jack Smith's subpoenaing congressional Republicans' phone records were even more appalling, and the Democrats' weaponization of the criminal justice system even more obvious and outrageous. Last week, Senator Chuck Grassley of Iowa released another tranche of documents he obtained through his relentless efforts to expose the weaponization of the Department of Justice, with whistleblowers feeding Grassley specifics on the deep state's nefarious doings. The Iowa Republican knew precisely which documents to request, as shown by the details contained in the nearly 100 pages of emails and timelines released 1 week ago. Those documents exposed efforts by the Obama administration and the DOJ and FBI holdovers under Trump to obstruct the investigation in the Clinton Foundation, which is not just pay for play, which was espionage. He was taking classified information, putting it in an electronic dead drop in her servers in her Chappaqua home bathroom, and then she'd put it in there after people would donate to the Clinton Foundation, and then they would have hackers go into that server and recover the classified information in that dead drop. More from the Federalist. Ohio enacts common sense law requiring all mail ballots to be returned by Election Day. Thank you very much. In a major win for the integrity of Ohio elections, Governor Mike DeWine signed legislation on Friday that requires all mail-in ballots to be received by the end of Election Day. Mail-in ballots are an avenue for fraud. That's why we never had them before, why we still have them. They should be illegal. It was a short stopgap measure to provide people access to voting during COVID, but COVID was just a cover to do this, and now they don't want to get rid of mail-in ballots. They're not secure. You have to have a chain of custody with ballots. You just can't mail them out because they all come back. Election Day is Election Day for a reason, said Republican State Senator Teresa Gavarone. Allowing ballots to be delivered days after the election does nothing but hurt the integrity and credibility of our elections. Because once you know the tally from election and you go, oh, we need 4,000 votes. Oh, here they are. Come on. Oh, we're at an hour already. I only had about 26 headlines today, and I was hoping to get done with an hour. I got stuff to do. I got to go to the police station. But let's try to get through them as best we can. Quickly. Post-millennial Trump DOJ sues DC Metro PD over Second Amendment violations. Civil Rights Division will defend American citizens' right to bear arms. Department of Justice has sued Washington, D.C.'s police department over the district's ban over several firearms, including AR-15. Harmeet Dillon is at the forefront of this. Good for her. Just the news, the Trump administration announces investigation of Brown University over a campus shooting. Brown University, the Department of Education announced Monday that it will conduct a program review of Brown University over its handling of the school shooting on its campus earlier this month that killed 2 students and wounded 9 others. The investigation will look into whether the school violated Section 485 of the Higher Education Act, also known as the Clery Act, which requires colleges and universities to meet campus safety and security-related requirements in order to receive federal funds. Fox News, common household chemicals linked to increased risk of serious neurological condition. Exposures to PFAS and PCB chemicals correlate with MS diagnosis. Researchers say, I always wondered about this. I'm like, so many people, like late in life, are getting multiple sclerosis. Usually that was a birth. You were born with the disease, or even, was diagnosed at a young age, and then you didn't really grow old with it, but you grew up with it. Now adults are coming down with it, and I guess it's linked to forever chemicals and forever plastics. Skip that one. Because I just wanted to get into Musk's big unduly delayed payday. This is from the National Review. If you didn't know, he had $1 billion billions and billions of dollar compensation package that was kept from him by the courts, and he finally got it. It was an agreement with Tesla. New York Times, President Trump announces plans for new Trump class of warships. 25 warships, the Trump class warships, which are going to be battleships, but modern battleships that include nuclear ballistic missile launchers, advanced weaponry, lasers, et cetera, et cetera. Just the news, EU's roughly $105 billion loan allows Ukraine to keep fighting Russia, changes dynamics of any peace deal. Oh, there was the other text. Also, Germany's debt-fueled illusions MERS humiliated economy in free fall. Basically, this has to do with whether or not you believe in Keynesian economics that debt doesn't matter. Surely it does. And as a Zero Hedge article points out, wealth cannot be printed with debt. So Germany's economy is in free fall. That's why they need to have a war with Russia. Zero Hedge again, new NATO hub to open in Romania, doubling weapons deliveries to Ukraine. Now we know this now because we knew Romanian elections were interfered with. So because the person that was actually elected was against the Russian war, so they would have never been able to open a NATO hub in Romania if the actual president got elected. Instead, they installed some other guy through a CIA fucking around with the Romanian elections. And then the guy that won was ineligible to get elected. And then his number two guy won the next election. And then they said, no, he's not legitimate either. And then they rigged it for their guy so they could put in this NATO hub to ship weapons, doubling weapons deliveries to Ukraine. Plus, we have this $105 billion worth of weaponry and support from the EU. Like I said, the EU wants World War III. I'm not going to get into the details of this. I'm going to go on to the next story, which also broke today. Clean, limitless energy exists. China is going big in the race to harness it. This is about fusion. Doesn't talk about the communist Chinese, just talks about China. Fusion reaction must heat hydrogen to temperatures hotter than the sun, turning it into plasma for a state of matter. But if you know anything about this, you'd understand that you can't contain that fusion reaction. And that's why they're talking about cold fusion and doing all these things. I think the technology is already there, but that's just me. But it is clean energy, and once we find fusion, there'll be no need for fossil fuels or solar or anything else. It's unlimitless, and except for explosive capabilities, it doesn't produce any harmful waste like fission nuclear reaction does. But again, it's a race for fusion. Here's a chart that shows how much we're spending compared to China, and even other countries are spending just as much to get that done. I think that's it. All right, so that was like an hour and 6 minutes, right? Hour and 4 minutes. Thank you for chiming in, Ronaldus Magnanimous. At the start of the broadcast, he wrote, why should the rights of illegal aliens supersede the rights of Americans? Obviously, it shouldn't. Not even the rights of non-citizens shouldn't supersede the rights of citizens. And also he asked, why should the U.S. District Judge have the authority to dictate foreign policy? That's Boasberg. He doesn't. And he reiterates what I said originally on Rumble. Ronaldus Magnanimous says, ho, 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 Merry Christmas. Now get the fuck out. And I hope people, I'm sure there are going to be many illegal aliens that take Kristi Noem up on her offer, $3,000 in a plane trip. $3,000 is a lot of money. Have at it. Thanks for joining me today. Don't forget to engage the channel, like, subscribe, leave a comment, share the podcast. Remember, I'm usually here every day, Monday through Friday, 10 a.m. on Rumble. You can check me out on their social media, Getter, Facebook, Minds, Substack. Thanks for joining me today. Have a great Christmas. Merry Christmas, we say. And I'll see you before the new year. Appreciate everybody joining me today. Respect.
The New World Order.
You can't handle the truth.